Chapter 1. The Young King. Henry VIII became king in 1509, just before his 18th birthday. Young Henry was not prepared to be king. He became king only because his elder brother Arthur died at the age of 15. Soon after the coronation, Henry married his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who was his brother Arthur's widow. Catherine was the only child of King Ferdinand of Spain. Spain was then a very powerful country. This marriage created a strong alliance between the two countries. Catherine was beautiful and intelligent, and Henry loved her. For almost 20 years they were the perfect royal couple and were happy together. The new king looked like a hero. Henry was handsome and robust. He was 6 foot tall. At that time, most men were about 5 foot 4 inches tall. He had bright blue eyes and red hair. He also had a strong personality. The people of England liked King Henry. Young Henry was strong and full of energy. He loved playing tennis, riding horses, and hunting. He hunted in the forest with hawks. He was a very skilled swordsman and loved mock fights called jousts. Henry was also a great scholar. He spoke English, French, Latin, and Spanish. He studied ancient Greek, religious writings, mathematics, and astronomy. He was an avid reader and encouraged others to read too. He loved music and played several instruments very well: the harp, the organ, the lute, and the virginals. He was a good singer and dancer, and also composed beautiful songs. We can still listen to some of his compositions. During this time, the Renaissance developed in England. King Henry was a patron of the arts. Writers, poets, painters, and musicians were all welcome at his court. The famous Dutch scholar Erasmus was Henry's friend. The young king was very busy with banquets, dancing, hunting, and sports. He decorated his castles and palaces with beautiful furniture and paintings. He wore expensive clothes and jewelry and was generous with his friends. Henry did not have much time to govern his country. One of his advisers began to govern England. His name was Thomas Wolsey, a clever man of humble origins. He was a cardinal of the church. Henry desperately wanted an heir to the Tudor throne. Early in 1511, Catherine gave birth to a son. There were great celebrations, but the little prince died after 2 months. King Henry was very disappointed. Chapter 2. War, Peace, and Taxes. King Henry was a very ambitious man. He wanted the glory of a war, and in 1512 he invaded France unsuccessfully. The following year, Henry was more successful. The English won a battle that Henry called the Battle of the Spurs. While Henry was in France, the Scottish king, James IV, invaded northern England. After a violent battle, the English won at Flodden Field. King James IV and thousands of Scots were killed. Henry was pleased with the success in France, and he wanted to return the following year. However, the war cost a lot of money, and only a little land was conquered. Henry's adviser, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, did not want another war. he convinced Henry to make peace with France. He was a very ambitious and greedy man. In 1515, he became Lord Chancellor of England. He was the most powerful man in the country after the king. Wolsey became very rich. He used his money to build the 1,000-room palace of Hampton Court. He later gave it to Henry to win his favour. During this period, there were many religious problems. The Catholic Church was very powerful and very rich. Many people in England did not like the church or the priests. They were tired of paying high taxes to the church. In October 1517, a German monk called Martin Luther protested against the Catholic Church. He wanted to make radical changes. This was the beginning of the Reformation and the Protestant Church. Henry did not like Martin Luther's ideas and wrote the Defense of the Seven Sacraments. He dedicated it to Pope Leo X. The Pope was pleased and gave Henry the title of Defender of the Faith. For 8 years, Cardinal Wolsey kept peace with France. In 1520, he organized a meeting in Picardy in France between the two kings. Wolsey wanted the kings to sign a peace treaty. Elaborate tents made of gold cloth and a beautiful palace were created for the two kings and their courts. The entire English court of 5,800 people went to Picardy. There were jousts and elaborate banquets. An immense amount of money was spent for this occasion. Henry wore a cloak made of gold cloth. The extravagant finery gave the meeting its name, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. The two kings signed a peace treaty, but after 2 years they were at war again. Henry and his court lived in luxury. His clothes and jewels were always more magnificent. Henry soon spent most of his father's money. During almost 20 years of marriage, Catherine gave birth to 4 sons, but they all died. Only a girl, Princess Mary, survived. Henry was desperate. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a son to become king after his death. Catherine was too old to have other children, and Henry lost interest in her. Chapter 3. The Break with Rome. Early in 1526, Henry met a young English lady of the court. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She had long black hair and dark eyes. She spoke French and wore elegant French clothes. She was very lively, intelligent, and interested in politics. Henry fell in love with her immediately. Several men of the court fell in love with her too. Anne had a 6th finger on her left hand. Her enemies called her a witch. Henry wanted to marry Anne Boleyn and have a son with her. He decided to divorce Catherine, but he needed permission from the Pope in Rome. He asked Cardinal Wolsey to convince the Pope. After a few years, the Pope refused the divorce. Henry was furious with Wolsey and the Church. He accused Cardinal Wolsey of treason, and he died soon after. In 1529, Henry chose Sir Thomas More, a great scholar and an honest man, as Lord Chancellor of England. Sir Thomas More was Lord Chancellor until 1532, when he was beheaded because he opposed Henry's break with Rome. In 1533, Henry also chose a new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer wanted to change the Church. He believed in the absolute power of the king. Cranmer encouraged the use of the Bible in English. He also helped to establish the Protestant Church in England. He later annulled Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. In January 1533, Henry and Anne Boleyn were secretly married. Catherine of Aragon was banished from court and died alone 3 years later. By May 1533, Anne Boleyn was Queen of England. 4 months later, she gave birth to Princess Elizabeth, another girl. Henry was desolate. He wanted a son more than anything. In 1534, Thomas Cromwell, Henry's new Lord Chancellor, helped put into effect the Act of Supremacy. With this act, Henry became the supreme head of the Church of England. Henry was soon tired of Anne, because she did not give him a son. He then met another lady called Jane Seymour and fell in love with her. Anne, Henry's second wife, was accused of adultery and treason. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London and was beheaded in May 1536. 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry married Jane Seymour. She was a quiet, docile lady who brought happiness to the royal family. In October 1537, Jane gave birth to a son, Prince Edward. King Henry was overjoyed, and the whole country celebrated. Unfortunately, after 12 days the Queen died from an infection. Henry mourned her for a long time. Jane, his third wife, was probably his favourite. Henry now had an heir. Prince Edward was the future King of England. He was first in succession to the throne because he was a male. Edward was intelligent and received an excellent education from the best scholars. To show his power and importance, Henry VIII built magnificent palaces such as St. James's Palace and Whitehall Palace. He also built castles and more than 50 houses around England. Chapter 4. Henry's later years. In Henry's time, there were about 850 monasteries in England and Wales. The religious orders obeyed the Pope in Rome and not King Henry. The monasteries had rich treasures and a quarter of all the land in England. Henry needed money, so he and his Lord Chancellor Cromwell decided to close the monasteries and take their treasures and land. Between 1536 and 1539, Cromwell sent his men to inspect them. When they returned, they said, "There is corruption in the monasteries." This was a good reason to close them. Cromwell's men took the rich treasures and gave them to the king. They sent away the monks and nuns. Some monasteries were destroyed and others were sold to the nobility. Many were transformed into beautiful houses. The land of the monasteries now belonged to King Henry, who became the richest monarch in Europe. With the money from the monasteries, Henry built castles and fortifications to protect the south coast of England. Deal Castle in Kent was the biggest fort on the coast. It was built in the form of a rose, the Tudor symbol. Henry also built bigger warships. England now had the most powerful navy in Europe. Henry's great warship, the Mary Rose, sank in 1545. In 1982, the remains of the ship were found, and now the Mary Rose can be seen at the naval dockyard in Portsmouth. Henry was now 48. He was very fat, and his health was not good. He became short-tempered and oppressive. Everyone had to obey him. The Tudor court still attracted many artists and musicians. Hans Holbein the Younger was a great German artist. He was the king's royal painter. He painted many splendid pictures of the royal family and the Tudor court. During the 1540s, Henry built an extravagant new palace called Nonsuch Palace in Surrey. A village was destroyed to build it, but it was never completed. Henry's political position in Europe became weak. Spain and France wanted to destroy him. He needed a strong ally. Cromwell convinced Henry to marry a German princess called Anne of Cleves. Henry sent Holbein to Germany to paint her portrait. Holbein painted a lovely portrait of Anne, which convinced Henry to marry her. When she arrived in England, Henry was horribly surprised. She was ugly and fat, and some people said she looked like a horse. She didn't speak English or like music. He was very angry with Cromwell, who was accused of treason and beheaded in 1540. Henry married Anne for political reasons and divorced her 7 months later in July. Catherine Howard became Henry's fifth wife in the same month, July 1540. She was only 19 years old and very frivolous. Catherine was unfaithful, and Henry became furious. She was accused of treason and beheaded in 1542. At this point of his life, Henry wanted a sincere companion and a nurse. He married his last wife, Catherine Parr, in 1543. She was a mature woman of 31, who was gentle and well educated. In Henry's time, most people did not live past 45. Catherine brought Henry's 3 children to court and took interest in their education. She was a kind and loving stepmother. She also encouraged Henry to found Trinity College, a part of Oxford University. Henry's last marriage was successful. During his later years, there were wars with Scotland and France. These wars cost Henry an enormous amount of money. At last he made peace with France in 1546. Henry's final years were tormented by illness. He was obese. He could not walk and was carried everywhere by servants. He had painful ulcers on his legs, severe headaches, and several other illnesses. Catherine Parr nursed him patiently. In his will, he named his 3 children heirs to the throne. Henry remained a Catholic all his life. He died on the 28th of January, 1547, and was buried at Windsor next to his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, the wife he loved the most.
Chapter 1. Young Elizabeth. Elizabeth was born on the 7th of September, 1533. Her childhood was not happy. She was 2 years old when her mother, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded. She spent most of her early life at Hatfield House, away from her father, King Henry VIII. However, Henry wanted his daughter to have the best education. Roger Ascham, a great scholar and humanist, was Elizabeth's private teacher. She was very intelligent, witty, and enjoyed learning. She could read, write, and speak Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, Italian, and Welsh fluently. Elizabeth loved riding horses, hunting, and dancing. Like her father, she had a talent for music and played the lute and the virginals. Unlike her father, she was very thrifty and did not like spending money. Elizabeth wasn't beautiful, but she was elegant. She was thin, of medium height, and very vain. She had red hair, expressive eyes, and lovely hands. When Henry VIII died in 1547, Edward VI became king at the age of 9. But his reign was short. He died of tuberculosis when he was only 15. In 1553, his half-sister Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, became queen. Her mother was a Catholic, and she wanted England to be a Catholic country again. Protestants were persecuted, and almost 300 were killed. For this reason, she was also known as Bloody Mary. Young Elizabeth was in danger because she was a Protestant and was very popular with the people. Queen Mary thought Elizabeth plotted against her and imprisoned her in the Tower of London in 1554. Elizabeth never forgot this terrible experience. After 2 months, Mary freed her. On the night of the 17th of November, 1558, Queen Mary died. The bells of London rang and everyone celebrated. Young Elizabeth was the new queen. Elizabeth became queen at the age of 25. Like others of her time, Elizabeth believed in astrology. Her astrologer was John Dee, a famous astronomer. He chose the best day for her coronation ceremony, the 15th of January, 1559. Elizabeth was loved by the people, but she was still in danger. The kings of France and Spain wanted to invade England and bring back the Catholic faith. The young queen was alert, clever, and prudent. She carefully chose advisers who were honest, loyal, and experienced. William Cecil was Elizabeth's Secretary of State and her most important minister. He was her dear friend, and she trusted him completely. Cecil served her for 40 years. Elizabeth was very wise to choose Matthew Parker as Archbishop of Canterbury. He established a moderate Church of England and created a compromise between Catholics and extreme Protestants. She also chose Lord Robert Dudley to be part of her court. He was her childhood friend and sweetheart, and remained one of her favourites for many years. Elizabeth was a strong ruler. England was now a Protestant country. The Act of Supremacy made her head of the Church of England. All priests had to use the Book of Common Prayer. The Queen liked meeting her people and was always kind to the old and the sick. She and her court frequently went on tours or progresses around the country to visit noble subjects. It was an honour to be part of a royal tour. However, the cost of entertaining the Queen and her court was astronomical, and several nobles went bankrupt.